I got up a little later than intended this day. I meant to be out shooting already, but instead I'm just having my coffee. So by the time I got to the river here, the sun had been out for a good hour and a half. Oh well, it's fine. I just really like catching the light as low as possible. And in Albuquerque, because we don't have what I would consider to be a true sunrise, in that it rises behind a mountain, not just on the horizon, I feel like I'm already starting at a disadvantage in that sense. But I got this drone a short while back. First drone I ever used. I mean, really the first one I'd ever seen, other than just kind of casually walking by them at Best Buy or something, not particularly paying attention. There's just such a huge disparity between how I planned to use this drone and how I actually find myself using it. That is, my interest in drone piloting is far greater than I could have ever anticipated. I just sort of fell in love with the thing. I only wanted it to be like a floating camera in the sky to film me while I'm doing my shoots, because I sort of hate like futzing about with a camera on a tripod, trying to keep it pointed at myself. I know there are various solutions for that, but all of those solutions still involve lugging around something on a tripod and to some degree pointing it, if not pointing it, at least moving it from location to location, which might not sound like much work. Okay, granted, it's not a lot of work, but what it is a huge distraction. With the drone, for at least some period of time, you know, it will burn through batteries fairly quickly, but for some period of time, 35 minutes, 40, I can just forget it, let the drone track me, and I don't have to think about it until it's time to swap out batteries. And that's awesome. That's very valuable to me. So I think I chose wisely in that regard. But I never expected just to have a blast flying the thing around and taking photos. Video too, of course. But I'm definitely a still photographer. I like video, but it comes a bit closer to an obligation, whereas still photography is the thing that I love most. Okay, but as you'll notice, that's not how I'm using the drone. I am not filming myself at all. I will, though. That's its intended purpose, and I'll do a lot of that, but I guess I just discovered that it has way more value than that as an addition to my camera bag. I mean, that's something that many people already know. I had to figure it out for myself, though. But I like to be up close to my subjects, kind of isolate them from their surroundings. I'm not so into the big wide shots. I mean, once upon a time I was, a long time ago. But that's not really where I'm at anymore, and it hasn't really been in a long time. So maybe I couldn't see the potential in a floating camera in the sky. But also I stopped thinking of it as a floating camera in the sky, at least regarding my photography work. Maybe so when I'm filming myself. I think of it more as like analogous to a lens. You know, you have your various lenses for various purposes. This is the lens that allows you to shoot straight down, among other things. And I think there's a lot of cool potential in shooting straight down. But that is not a very good shot. I have not yet realized that potential. Kind of just looks like a mess, but it's maybe the start of something, a different way of thinking. Honestly, that's super exciting to be a novice at some type of photography. Just the opportunity to explore, learn, experiment. As I was taking just normal shots with Rousdower, that's what I call my camera, I was just leaving the drone in the air, and I'd alternate between them. And maybe I should have brought it down to film myself, but that's just not where my proverbial heart was at today. I'm not the biggest fan of doing a bunch of things at the same time. Kind of degrades the experience, in my experience. I mean, I'm out shooting with my camera and I'm out shooting with the drone, so I leave it in the air and it's ready to go. My lens in the sky. My new lens. Yeah, my new lens is a drone. I think I just came up with the title. But bringing it down every so often to film myself, just too many things going on at once. There will be lots of times where I'm just using it to film myself. But I was just too excited to take photos with it, so that's what I did. I have crashed the thing twice, and it's held up extremely well. One time, the first time, was a whole huge ordeal where I had to go recover it on the side of a mountain. And then, after I recovered it, literally the next day I just rammed it right into a wall. I felt even stupider the second time. But Defiant came through just fine. No damage, a couple of scrapes. Defiant is the name of my drone. Sorry, is it obnoxious that I name things? I don't always do that, but in this case there were specific reasons that I felt attached to these devices, so yes, I gave them names. In the case of the drone, it was the recovery effort to rescue it from the side of the mountain. After that, I just felt like we'd been through something together. And when I named it Defiant, I was thinking of it kind of like an air vessel. Like the Defiant. Like, hey, I'm gonna go fly the Defiant. But I've come to think of it more as a robotic pal that just sort of follows me on my adventures, a la droids in Star Wars, so I just call it Defiant. And the R5 being named Roused Hour, there's a little bit of a more convoluted explanation there. For years I'd been shooting on 2 EOS Rs. I always had this thing where I needed to buy cameras in pairs, but I would usually buy one first and, pay that off and then buy a second one. But I always liked shooting with a matching pair of cameras, but I don't know that I still feel the same way. It is an awfully big investment into that one camera body, rather than putting that money toward the next model or something. But for a long time I just felt like maybe I'd made a mistake buying a second R, and I really wanted an R5 for a really long time. And then I ended up buying one, and there was a problem, and I had to return it. And that was a bummer, so I bought a second one, which also had a problem, and I ended up returning it. And then there was this long period of, it wasn't that long, I don't know, a month or something, of reevaluating. Is an R5 really the right camera for me? Is Canon even the right brand for me anymore? But okay, obviously the story ends with me buying a third R5 and keeping it. But in some respects I really prefer the image quality coming out of the R. The R5 is advantageous in other respects, but to me image quality is a little bit of a step down, and that's a bummer. But I decided just to embrace it anyway, despite its faults. And in that way it felt, something akin to a human relationship. Maybe I'm just, in my old age, anthropomorphizing my equipment, and that's a dangerous road to go down. But I don't know. I felt like it deserved a name, so I gave it one. Roused Hour, Defiant. One thing that kept me in Camp Canon was that I just adore my 50mm RF 1.2 lens. It's so good, it feels like I'm cheating when I use it. I don't know, they in quotes, that the Sony equivalent lens is even better. Maybe it is, but I find it hard to believe that any lens is better. 50mm is my favorite focal length, and that's just by far the best I've ever used. So anyway, I've crashed the drone twice, I mentioned. I also had a very close call once at night with the roof of a Walgreens. But in every case, I've learned a valuable lesson. A valuable, never-to-be-repeated mistake became clear to me. So I think I'm getting a little bit better at flying the thing. I've had it for about a month now. No more crashes, no more close calls. I've learned to be cautious but brave at the same time. Like, I don't take risks, but I'm also not paralyzed by fear. But a week or two ago, I feel like I would have been afraid to fly around all these buildings, or even just in such a busy area for fear it might just fall out of the sky and either someone steal it or a car run over it. But I've gained a lot of confidence in the drone's ability to just hover and wait for instructions, even in some pretty serious wind. I'm cautious. I mean, if the wind really starts to pick up, I'll land the drone if it's getting severe. It's happened quite a few times, actually. It's a really windy year and a really windy time of year. But I have learned to, for the most part, just relax and trust the thing. The technology seems pretty sound, pretty mature. The drone isn't going to crash itself. I mean, it might if it's tracking me and doesn't see a thin tree branch or power line, but just hovering there, it's going to be fine. Maintaining visual line of sight, which is a requirement for recreational drone piloting, was actually way easier to do downtown than anywhere I've flown so far. Probably helped that I was on top of a building myself, so I wasn't having to look up and potentially lose it in the sun or bright sky. That being said, there were a couple of times I lost sight of it, but I'm really trying to follow the rules to the best of my ability. But I'm also interested in getting my commercial drone pilot license. Seriously, who knew drones were going to be this much fun? The answer is, of course, probably everyone other than me. But Canon just finally released a 35mm L lens in the RF mount. I've been waiting for that lens, but also unsure if I would buy it because it's such a similar focal length to 50mm. I do like a 35 though. It's just, is it worth spending that much money again for a slightly different focal length? Well, I don't know. That's something I have to consider. So instead I bought a lens in the sky, because that is very different than any lens I've ever owned. My new lens is a drone. There's that title again. But I had to request permission to fly here from the FAA. That was pretty cool. We have 2 airports and 1 Air Force base, and for a couple mile radius around them, you're not allowed to fly without permission, but there's a system in place where you can, provided you're flying at a kind of low altitude, 50 feet or below, you can get instant approval to fly in a lot of these areas. And that whole process was incredibly smooth and quick, and honestly just way better than I would have anticipated. I guess I had this preconceived notion, I don't even really know where it came from, that drones as a hobby kind of made you a target from the public, from law enforcement, that you would get hassled, that government agencies would intentionally make things as difficult as possible. That has not remotely been my experience, though. Quite the opposite, in fact. I have had one interaction with the police, and it was pleasant, and I've had a few interactions with random citizens, and they were equally lovely. I think people in New Mexico, though, are just very chill about art stuff. It's the place in the world I've been hassled the least. Yeah, nobody cares here. That is my favorite aspect of living in New Mexico. I may not be living in New Mexico for that much longer. And there are many things I will not miss about living here, but the people in general I will kind of miss. I mean, there are individuals I don't like, but the non-busybody nature of the population at large, that's a pretty cool quality. There was a way higher percentage of Harriet Olsen types where I grew up in Arkansas. So the only problem with my assertion that the drone is actually just another lens in my bag is that I wouldn't choose to carry a lens of this caliber in my bag. What I mean is, it's not a high-end lens, obviously. It's something more akin to an action camera. And of course, I'm calling it a lens, but this is including the sensor. In fact, it's mostly about the sensor, but the sensor is actually pretty good. This thing does remarkably well in low light situations. You're getting a 48 megapixel RAW file out of it that looks great. Yeah, you're never gonna get like shallow depth of field or something like that. And sure, there are situations where that's kind of a bummer, but there are far more situations where it doesn't matter at all. If you were floating around in the sky with a 24mm lens, shooting back down toward the ground, even wide open with a fast prime lens at that distance, everything's gonna basically be in focus anyway. And if it were an option, would I even want like my expensive RF lenses floating around in the sky? Or would I want something a little bit more disposable? B. The answer is B. But I'm just thrilled with this whole discovery I made about how much I enjoy this. I've never been so out of sync, between how I thought I would use a product and how I actually use it. The only problem now is to get back to actually filming myself with it and walking around and shooting in a more traditional way. I don't know, my heart belongs somewhere else at the moment. I'm way into this drone photography now.